But considering after the Madrid conference in the fall that year, seasons past the U.S.'s successful Desert Storm in Iraq, and that H.W. Bush doesn't win a second term the following year, with Clinton being inaugurated a month before the Trade Center bombing, when looking back in that same time window to planning and conspiracy revealed years prior, with Nosair assassinating Kahana, the narrative that Ali Mohammed was ultimately Nosair's handler is also to be challenged, since there seems to be someone else who's been left out of the picture, and only briefly brought up by few authors and reporters pointing out the Mujahid al-Salaam Mosque's history.
6 blocks away, the mosque where Mohammed Salama worships. Apparently, it is much more than just a place of prayer. Among the 300 to 400 followers, Sultan Ibrahim el-Ghali, an Egyptian-born Muslim who was convicted of trying to smuggle hundreds of pounds of explosives to the PLO in 1985.
Sultan Ibrahim el-Ghali was reportedly 47 years old around the time of his arrest in 1985. He immigrated to the U.S. in 1968. He is a wealthy Egyptian businessman who was a dominant figure and patron in the Jersey community. As a gold smuggler, he was a local fixer. He loaned everybody money, arranged forged driver's licenses for illegal immigrants, and arranged marriage licenses and certificates for those who needed it. He ended up owning a travel agency named Sultan Travel, which through it is where he ended up getting caught in a U.S. customs sting operation attempting to smuggle explosives and weapons to a PLO representative to Saudi Arabia in 1985. According to newspapers after the Kahani assassination and events in 1993, it turns out that Sultan el-Ghali is a cousin and relative to both El Sayed Nosair and Ibrahim al-Gabroni. And not just that, according to Laurie Milroy and Robert L. Friedman, who had briefly interviewed el-Ghali, had reported that he was either a leader or founder of the Mujahid al-Salaam Mosque in New Jersey. So considering the narrative that Nosair was ideally handled and designated by Ali Mohammed, or even spiritually guided by the blind sheikh for that matter, doesn't sound reasonable at all, considering that we have something glaring about Nosair's family background and mosque centrally in question that's obviously been overlooked, besides for the fact that Nosair had already been living in the U.S. 5 years before Ali showed up on the scene. And something else that also should be considered from what was found after the Kahani assassination, according to terrorism researcher and Islamophobe propagandist Steve Emerson, that manuals and instructions on how to hijack aircraft was also confiscated from Nosair's place. And strangely enough, on the morning of September 11th, while the Twin Towers were burning, minutes before Flight 77 struck the Pentagon, terrorism expert and former State Department official Larry Johnson was briefly interviewed on the phone by NBC's Today Show and had this to say to Katie Tour.
Back in 1992, there was 93, there was a Lufthansa plane hijacked from Germany, and it ended up landing in New York. And one of the concerns we had at that time was the possibility of that plane, under the control of a hijacker, flying it into one of the buildings.
What incident that Larry Johnson is talking about was actually on February 11th, 1993, just 2 weeks before the World Trade Center bombing, where an Egyptian-born Ethiopian national living in Morocco named Nebu Demek, armed with a gun, hijacked Lufthansa Flight 592 from Frankfurt, Germany to Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, where he forced the pilot to fly the plane to JFK Airport in New York, seeking asylum. The aircraft landed safely, and Demek, the gunman, surrendered peacefully and without incident, and was later charged with the aircraft hijacking by a United States District Court. However, the point being is that some officials were certainly fearful that this Lufthansa flight may have been targeting to crash into the Twin Towers back then, which would be indicative that our national security state knew something was in the works of a future terrorist attack of that magnitude, coming out of information gained from Nosair's apartment, or maybe even before. It would also mean that the discovery of the Bojika plot on Ramzi Yousef's laptop from the Philippines apartment fire years later could still have been a very late forewarning or lucky discovery for the public that such a plot to crash airliners striking American targets was conceivable and a looming danger, unlike what the national security state may had already known for a while, or how they perceived themselves to the public as being oblivious or no way of having any foresight or advanced knowledge. And then when considering the earliest indication of the Twin Towers being a target comes from all the items and data law enforcement officials discovered and confiscated through the search of Nosair's residence too, again with Ramzi Yousef, one would still have to wonder further about his role as a professional mastermind of the Trade Center bombing, playing the part to fulfill this obligation 2 years and 4 months later after Nosair is incarcerated, without any written guidance of his, meaning that even if Ramzi Yousef was getting bomb-making tips from Ahmed Ajab and his manuals while incarcerated in an INS facility, it still would have been useful for him to have a map map or blueprints of the World Trade Center in order to know where would be the best place to park the explosive-laden Ryder van in their attempts to topple the Twin Towers. And maybe Yusuf, as well as future World Trade Center conspirators behind 9/11, had such maps and blueprints of the Twin Towers.